And it's time now for a motion to adjourn with MP Chris Famous and Dwayne Robinson.
Good afternoon.
Yes, and welcome to Motion to Adjourn.
It feels like, is it 3 hours here? I feel like the good old days.
We're back to normal, are we?
Yeah. Good afternoon to Bermuda. Good afternoon to all our listeners. You know, I love our listeners, the ones that WhatsApp me and send me stuff on Facebook.
Yeah, what do they say? What do they say? Enlighten us. About the show, that is. About the show.
About the show.
Yeah.
They, we always send out something in advance to say who we're interviewing them, who we're going to be interviewing, or what the subject matter is, and they say, thanks, I'll be tuning in during the show. Some people WhatsApp and say, good point, or, whatever.
Yeah.
So I just want to,
encouragement.
It's, although radio is sort of one side, you can't see anyone, right? It's important that we just tell them thank you and how important it is for the support.
Thank you.
Agreed.
So today we have a very interesting topic and a very interesting guest, and I'm going to leave that in the hands of Dwayne to do the introductions.
So for the listening
is
audience...
the guest there?
Yes. She's online. Yes, she is.
Yeah. So for the listening audience, for those who don't know, haven't tuned in, we've been highlighting women in politics, and we've had two previous women that were former parliamentarians, being the Honorable Renee Webb and the Honorable Pat Gordon-Pamplin. So this time we will have a female MP that is a current sitting MP to weigh in on women in politics and how that affects the island and the world. So we are happy to have MP Susan Jackson online, JPMP. She is a corporate communication specialist with over 20 years in strategic and tactical support during crisis, acquisitions, and infrastructure development. So without further ado, I'll let her come on and say some things about herself. How are you, MP?
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Robinson. I'm fine, thank you. And MP Famous.
Good afternoon.
Hear your voices this afternoon.
And she calls you Mr. Robinson.
I know that might have been the first time.
She didn't call you nephew.
Yeah, that is my aunt. Yes, I claim it. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks.
Good. Thank you for joining us. So, obviously, before we kick into the questions and allowing you to kind of weigh in on the topic, you could add a few things that folks may not know about you.
Well, I guess maybe a few things that they may not know about me. Women in Parliament. So I'm going to begin by saying that I actually spent about a decade at home with my children. I gave up my professional life. I gave up public service. Actually, at one point, even left my homeland to live abroad in Washington, D.C., Maryland area. And during that time, I raised my children, who at the time were age 3 and age 6. So we had a different upbringing as far as child rearing is concerned. And to be honest with you, my main motivation to come back to Bermuda was to make sure that my children were familiar and very much a part of the local Bermuda community, and to make sure that they had their Bermudian identity in check. And so that's one fact that people might not know too much about me. Another that is known a little bit, I lived on a boat for 3 years. When I came back to Bermuda, I realized that it was super expensive to live here. I've always enjoyed the ocean. I've always been around swimming and boat. My friends all tinkered around with boats, their parents' boats, etc. And so I thought, as an adult, I'm going to buy a boat and I'm going to live on it, which I did. It was an amazing adventure. But I also did find that it was a way for me to, see Bermuda from a different perspective, from a different set of eyes. And also, it was an awful lot less expensive living on a boat. Yeah.
So I have a question for you, MP.
Yes.
I find something that's very interesting that a lot of people may not know about you. Your early career was at the Department of Education,
Yes.
not necessarily as a teacher, but what exactly did you do at the Department of Education?
So I was a speech and language correctionist was the title that was offered now, better known as speech language therapists now. And my position was that there was a case of about 100 children for each of about 7 speech correctionists in the education department at the time. And so we handled the cases, and it was a great exposure because we traveled from school to school. And so I was exposed over a 7-year period, which was the time that I spent employed with the Department of Education, traveling from school to school, meeting with students and providing therapy to help them to articulate in the production of their speech, as well as to assist them in understanding and listening to language. And so there were a number of, many of the children were at the elementary level, which is it's best to get children in their early developmental years. And so there were lots of games, activities, consultation, and working with parents so that there were activities at home that the parents could continue outside of school. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot about the education system itself. And I believe that one of the best rewards I've gotten from that is to now see adults that are out and about that will come up and say, oh, you know, Mrs. Jackson, do you remember me when I had a disfluency? And, you know, listen to me now, I'm all grown up. And so one does really see the results of the work, even though at the time it seems like these little tiny detailed steps in development. But as the child grows and really starts to develop their speech and language, it creates a well-rounded adult.
Mm-hmm. So in listening to your speech is almost pitch perfect. It is pitch perfect.
Well, thank you very much.
So, like, let's say somebody, I don't know, a work colleague, you know, not saying what type of work, but let's say they want to improve their speech. Can they call the speech therapist?
Well, yes. There are speech therapists actually that work in the hospital situation. So there are a number of adults who suffer strokes and other debilitating, whether they be through accidents or whether it's health related, and lose their ability to speak. And so speech therapists will work with adults to reclaim some of the speech and language and motor skills associated with speech as adults. But other than that, and MP Famous, you might be sort of referring more to sort of the public speaking and things like that, of which there are many groups out. Toastmasters comes to mind, where adults do gather and come together and practice and strengthen their public speaking skills.
Yeah, because I find like when I listen back to myself, or I listen to some persons, I hear like a lot of and you know, it's just something that people do subconsciously. And then when I listen back to myself, I always hear myself say right, like, you know, 10 times in one sentence.
Yeah.
And there's this, you know, I know that isn't necessarily the same vein, but this is all part.
Yeah, well, actually, there is a little to be said about that. They often refer to the intonations of and ah and right and many of the other sort of pieces as forms of disfluency. So sometimes we are thinking a little faster than we're actually able to put into words, into speech. And so in order to just gain a multi-second of extra time to get our thoughts to our mouths in order to say the words, we will come up with and ahs and rights and okays and what other words that we can use to fill the time until we get out what we want to get out.
Well, just to kind of tie it back into the topic today, how do you feel that your experiences as a woman in politics has allowed you to kind of influence and aid the parliamentary team for the OBA?
I have to be honest with you. I don't have any formal training in political science. This is not something that I've had any real education in.
I think you're being a little coy there.
Thank you, MP
members
Dana.
being a little coy there.
Yeah, I think she's got quite a pedergree when it comes to.
We'll get into that in a minute.
We're going to get there. But that's exactly it. So the legacy, the family generational commitment to public service has sort of lent itself to give me the added edge in the parliamentary system because it's almost a part of my DNA that public service as a parliamentarian or in some facet would probably be, an ongoing part of our generational legacy.
So, on that note, for those who don't know, the 1% of Bermuda that maybe does not know, maybe, tell us a little bit about this family background that helped to shape who MP Susan Jackson actually is.
Yes.
Yeah, so the Jackson family, the homestead is
it Michael Jackson family or Mrs. Jackson?
I tried that cousin piece for a little bit. It works for Mr. Robinson, and it works for Deputy Speaker Burgess, but the cousin with the Michael Jackson didn't work well for me. But the homestead for the Jacksons was in Brooklyn, which is just on the north side of the Corporation of Hamilton. It's right behind Butterfield Palace, and the building itself is still up on the hill. And this was a family of very hardworking, a large family with very hardworking parents. So they were very strict. I know that my grandfather was of a strict nature. He believed in education and worked very hard to make sure that all of his children were as successful as possible. My father is the only of his generation that got involved in the political system as president of the Senate for close to 16, 17 years. And before my father and before his father was my great-grandfather, who actually was one of the first black parliamentarians in the Bermuda chamber.
Could you say that again? May you repeat that, please?
Yeah, he was one of two. He was the second black member of parliament in the House. But my great-grandfather was clearly a man committed and devoted to this country. He was one of the founding members of the Barclay Institute, and we have carried that legacy through. My mother, Louise Jackson, spent many a year at the Barclay Institute and was committed there and developed the sport and culture at Barclay Institute, and I think really took especially physical education of women to a whole nother level. And my father, of course, was very much in the education system as principal of Harrington Sound Primary, principal of St. George's Secondary School. And so starting with my great-grandfather, which is where, sort of as far back as I'm familiar with, there's always been a huge commitment to public service in Bermuda.
No, I have it on some degree of authority that there seems to be more than just you involved in politics currently. in the family, I should say?
Well, I've got some cousins. My cousin is Lawrence Scott, who's Minister of Transport.
Lawrence Scott?
Yes,
Celebrity.
yes. So the two of us are in there, and then previously the former Minister Wayne Scott is also a cousin.
Great Scott. My God.
God.
This was a, what they call that word?
Yeah.
Conspiracy. Control both sides
Yeah.
of the aisle.
I was about to say.
Again, MP Famous. It goes right back to the beginning. I believe that political positions and are well founded in families that have a legacy of the public service. Because if and when we get into a conversation more about women in Parliament, we'll see some of the challenges. And these challenges aren't just for women, they're challenges in general. And so it's really, really hard, I believe, to just naturally and arbitrarily walk into the political arena and say, oh, I want to be a part of it.
So, on that note, being as you opened that Pandora's box, what caused you to say, I, Susan Jackson, shall go into politics?
I was mentored. And I was coached. And many people might think in the first instance it would have been my mother, Louise Jackson, but in actual fact, it was Jean Atherton. She took me out to lunch. She asked me about my interests in Parliament. She told me a little bit about it. She answered my questions. And then over the weeks and months, she stayed in touch, and she would call up and ask if I would like to sit on a committee and maybe learn a little bit more, if I'd like to volunteer here for an hour or two. And it just kept evolving until the next thing I knew, the big question was being asked.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like she, I don't know, what's that word doing, that term we used back in the day?
Mentoring. I think she was really mentoring
No,
me.
that's not the word we're looking for, member. I'm looking for a word called roped you in.
No, I think mentoring is a solid word.
Mentoring.
Yeah.
I'm sticking with it.
Jean, don't rope.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Hello, MP Atherton, if
World
you're
star.
listening. So go ahead, Dwayne.
Well, I mean, I just wanted to ask on that note, as far as the mentoring, do you feel that being mentored by another woman in politics kind of gave you a bit of added insight into what the challenges would be as a woman entering politics?
There are a number of layers to entering politics as a woman or as any individual. And certainly she provided a very important part, which was more the tactical part, the understanding what a caucus is, and then understanding what it is to sit on a committee, and then understanding what it is to volunteer, understanding what it is to have duties to the constituency. So, these were all sort of tactical pieces. These were, exercises when I learned how to do and when to show up, etc. The content, the passion, the purpose definitely came from the Jackson legacy. And there I had Louise Jackson, my mother, as a coach, and she was more around the passion and the purpose and how to get the best results, which is a little different from what Jean Atherton was exposing me to. So it was definitely a layered and more complex approach. It wasn't just, open one door and walk through.
And what have you found since, as right now you are the first to weigh in on this topic on this show as far as a sitting MP? So what are some of the, I would say, not hurdles, but some challenges you find being a sitting MP, as far as the House can be quite, as we all know, can be vicious at times. So how do you handle that particular aspect?
Point of order. The house being vicious. What are you saying
It's
about the house?
vicious.
The house ran by the Honorable Dennis Lister.
I mean,
The
I've
house
heard
being vicious?
it's vicious. Okay,
It's better now than it has been.
It's the Wild West in there. Okay, but with all due respect, I do think it has been better lately. I think it's probably because my MP here is motion to adjourn have been nicer lately.
Okay, we'll get into that one. Let's transition right into women in parliament, shall we?
Yes.
Yes, and
that's-
I'd like to weigh in on the question that Mr. Robinson.
I'm
just
hearing the
asked me.
passion now.
Yes.
The passion now.
The real challenges to entering the parliamentary process for me has been the learning curve. It has been understanding legislation, being able to create and understand how debate works, being able to navigate through debate and hold my point and get through that without sort of getting beaten down as sort of the debate process goes. So it could be debate in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't have to be parliament. But so learning about legislation, learning about debate, understanding all of the committee work that has been involved and the responsibilities and the accountability of being on or sitting on committees, which is very different from the legislation and very different from debate, and all of the other components that make up what happens in Parliament. And I have found that has been a huge learning curve for me. It's taken years, and probably the best reward or opportunity that I could have been given was being able to sit as the government whip and then the opposition whip, because that exposed me. It just opened doors and exposed me to learn more about what the speaker's duties are, to learn more about how all of the various pieces of the parliamentary process come together as one. And so those have been sort of the greatest challenges of getting involved in Parliament for me.
So, on that note, let me ask this. Women in Parliament. Oh, sorry, we're going to have a quick break and then we're going to get more into this subject.
You're locked to Power 95, Bermuda's big station, at 94.9 FM, a Bermuda Broadcasting Company station.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Diane Brewer with Bermuda Broadcasting News, sponsored by Butterfield.
Take control of your Butterfield credit card by downloading the Butterfield Card Alerts app. Monitor your spending activity with real-time transaction alerts sent directly to your mobile device. And if your card is lost or stolen, use the app to turn the card off, preventing any further transactions from being processed. Download the app from the Apple Store or Google Play Store today. Customized credit card controls. This is banking by Butterfield. The Bank of N.T. Butterfield & Son Limited is licensed to conduct banking business by the Bermuda Monetary Authority.
Bus is still off the road, and the situation compounded by radio silence from the parties involved in a dispute that has dragged on for 4 days. Transport Minister Lawrence Scott had called a press conference for 4 p.m. today, but it was canceled 10 minutes later. First public word from the BIU today came shortly after 4 p.m., announcing a press conference scheduled for 10:30 tomorrow morning. The information vacuumed today left bus users completely in the dark. This after government put out word that an agreement had been reached last night and that union members were due to meet this morning. Expectations were that the buses would be back in service today by noon, but that didn't happen, and no further information has been provided for the traveling public. The government has promised a statement will be issued later today. Look out for details in our 7 p.m. TV newscast. In other news, government kept the island on edge for 24 hours after announcing upcoming changes to coronavirus restrictions. Just Just after 9 p.m. last night, it was revealed that the Safe Key program will be expanded to all public indoor spaces where unmasking is permitted. As of 6 p.m. on Friday, Safe Key will be required for indoor dining, bars, clubs, sports or members clubs, and gyms. It will also be required to board commercial boats with more than 20 passengers and for all new large group exemptions. You can only acquire a Safe Key if you are fully vaccinated and 2 weeks past your second shot or within 3 days of a negative coronavirus test. Health Minister Kim Wilson said, quote, "When we step back and examine where we are now more than 4 weeks after the first Eastern County game and almost 3 weeks after the Cup match holiday weekend, not one positive case or cluster has yet to be identified as associated with large events that use the Safe Key. We have an outbreak to manage locally, and settings in which masks are permitted to be removed are the greatest risk for spreading of the virus. We must further mitigate that risk. Implementing the use of Safe Key in these settings is the best available tool for us to adjust but not interrupt our lives, our economy, and all the activities which we have safely enjoyed this summer, unlike last year," end quote. Meantime, researchers in the UK have found that the protection from 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine runs out faster than the protection offered by other jabs against the Delta variant. The study was carried out by Oxford University, which found that Pfizer is still more effective overall against the highly contagious variant. The findings have not yet been peer-reviewed. Scientists found that over time, the Pfizer-BioNTech's effectiveness dropped, while the Oxford-AstraZeneca's remained largely the same. But researchers stress that there's no cause for alarm, as the long-term effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine still ranks above the standard set by the World Health Organization. The researchers would not project how much more the protection from the Pfizer and AstraZeneca jabs would drop over time, but suggested that the efficacy of the 2 vaccines studied would converge within 4 to 5 months after the second shot. The Bermuda Post Office has issued its second commemorative stamp release of the year, featuring the Bermuda Sandcastle competition. Founded almost 30 years ago by Nikki Garrett, the Sandcastle competition is held annually at Horseshoe Bay on Labor Day weekend. In 2017, Hannah Emerson, a previous winner, took over the competition and has spent the last 4 years showcasing her efforts weekly across the island. She also conducts workshops to pass on her skills. The featured stamps depict a variety of intricate sand sculptures which have delighted residents and visitors over the years. The Minister for the Cabinet Office, Wayne Ferbert, said, quote, "Ms. Emerson has turned a fun activity into an art form. Each sculpture can take anywhere from 4 to 6 hours to create, and we are very pleased to highlight this unique and engaging activity," end quote. Orders for the stamps may be prepaid for collection or mailed on the day of issue at the Bermuda Post Office or any of the sub-post offices. And I'm Diane Brewer with Bermuda Broadcasting News. Have a wonderful evening.
Now back to Motion to Adjourn with MP Chris Famous and Dwayne Robinson.
Yes, indeed. Are you there, member?
I am here.
Okay. So, we were on the topic of women in Parliament. So, in your experience, what have women, this is an open-ended question, what have women brought to Parliament, not just your generation, but over the last, 30, 40 years? What have, in your opinion, what have women brought to Parliament that was missing prior?
I'm not sure I can go back as far as missing prior, but certainly women have, maybe by no fault of their own, brought in the social aspect. So it appears to me that having women, and many of whom have sat in ministries such as education and health and seniors, have been women, and that's where women seem to be placed and positioned to bring the best results for the community. And certainly in the time that I have been exposed to Parliament in Bermuda, I have found that those areas have become more passionate topics and have become something that a larger number of people in the community are aware of and have an opinion or some form of knowledge about. And I believe that that has come from females being in those ministries and in those ministerial positions and been able to drive those topics.
Mm-hmm. And of course I can't answer this because I'm a man, right? And my reading, understanding, comprehension is that, as you said, women generally worldwide tend to bring issues to the fore that men were very technocratic about, didn't care, or not too non-curious about. So there was you had mentioned something that MP Atherton had encouraged you to join communities volunteer. What was one of the key things that you volunteered for that you were able to help others beyond the whole reading, this speech therapy thing?
Yes, so certainly my most memorable, and it was Jean Atherton that exposed me and gave me the opportunity, was going into Summer Haven, which is a residential home. It has about 19 or 20 apartments, and this is a residence for people who are living in wheelchairs. And they were having some governance and some financial challenges. And Minister Atherton at the time, a Minister of Health, had asked if I may go in, and I was appointed as a governance receiver to go into Summer Haven and just help them to compile all of the sort of administrative pieces and get really good governance in place, as well as to just get the financial situation on a more even keel. And I was there for a few years and developed lifelong relationships and loved every minute of it. And that would probably be my most memorable.
Okay, so how were you able to transition that into action or legislation in Parliament?
There wasn't anything that I could say that transitioned it into legislation. The Summer Haven itself is actually it's a trust that is legislated, so it's a private bill, and there weren't any amendments that needed to be made to that bill, and there weren't any occasions that or circumstances that came out of my experience at Summer Haven that would have warranted any particular amendments to legislation that I was aware of at the time.
Okay. I didn't necessarily mean Summer Haven per se, but just the fact that you had to help those who were in positions that they couldn't actually do for themselves in some ways. How were you able to transition that into your role, your parliamentary role, using that same lens for other issues in the country, such as children's welfare and so on?
Yes. Well, one was accessibility. So it was very clear that more work needed to be done in and about Bermuda so that more people could gain access to as many opportunities as possible using a wheelchair versus walking. And certainly under the OBA and under PLP governments, there have been great strides that have been made to improve the accessibility of those who are in wheelchairs to gain access to buildings and to be able to maneuver around the island. So there was that side of it. On the other side is that we are seeing that statistically we're not having as many births, and I don't have any accurate statistics, so I'm putting up a disclaimer here, but we don't have as many births where we're finding that children are born into wheelchairs, and so many of the residents that and folks that I have met along the way have either received or are in wheelchairs because of an accident or because there's been a health crisis. And that led me, because with whether it's an accident or a health crisis, they're older individuals. And I did see an opportunity for us to transition and have more of a collaboration between people who are living in wheelchairs and what we're doing with the senior community. So whether that is that residents can cohabitate and build out the community so that those that are living in wheelchairs maybe don't feel as isolated, as well as being able to share some of the dedicated services that those who are living in wheelchairs receive, and sharing some of that with the community of seniors who may not be open to or may not have the opportunity to have this similar medical or social opportunities. And just having, maybe there's a place there where we can find some synergies and develop on that.
So, for any female who is listening, or any young woman or any aged woman really who is listening and interested in politics, what advice could you impart on them who are listening today if they wanted to get involved in the political arena?
I'm going to preface that because there are some reasons why women may not want to get involved in politics, and sometimes there's a bit of persuasion that has to take place. And I want to establish some of the research. There's research out there, as well as my own personal experiences, is that women have a real commitment to the work-life balance. That oftentimes, as women, we are the carers of children and of family members, our parents maybe as they're aging, and that can be a real barrier to entry into politics. There's also the financial side. Politics does not pay much, so the amount of time that it takes to be what would be described as a good parliamentarian, it's a lot of hours, and oftentimes it's either free or it actually is going to cost you as a candidate or as a member of parliament. It can cost. And then the final part, which is the more sensitive, is sort of the behavior, the feelings of not being listened to, not being respected. So if there were individual women out there who are interested, and oftentimes the median age in this age is around 50 plus, when women do get more active in Parliament, because some of those other factors that I just mentioned have been overcome. But for a young person that wants to get involved, I personally believe having a real purpose, having a reason why they want to get involved, and making that very clear. And once that happens, it makes it a little easier to navigate, the interviewing and the becoming a candidate, learning legislation and exactly what legislation interests a woman that might sort of entice her to get involved some more. Of course, the networking, the training, and the mentoring is huge, because I believe that coming into the parliamentary process completely blind to what's involved can become overwhelming very quickly. And I certainly know, maybe not so much in Bermuda, but that women do tend to get involved in politics. They may get elected, and then after a term or two, they bow out. And sometimes that's because of just the overwhelming commitment that is required to carry out the duties as parliamentarian.
So let me ask a question. You said something that's very interesting, and I'm going to challenge that. You said one of the points that is a challenge for women parliamentarians is that they have a feeling of not being listened to, correct?
Yes.
What could you elaborate on that to quantify your answer?
Yes. Well,
because I was listening. So
Yeah.
yes, thank you. I'm going to preface this by saying that the parliamentary structure is historically a male-created structure, and so the makeup of how Parliament works, like the nuts and bolts, the time when we meet, how we debate, all those things, did not necessarily consider a female in that process. And so sometimes it can be that it's just very difficult for a female to assert themselves into this male-dominated arena and be heard. And sometimes, yes, members are listening, absolutely. But if it's not a part of this unspoken male structure, then it can be discarded. And it can actually be bullied down because it's not meeting the needs of what the male intent is within that structure. And I'll leave it at that.
Because I would rebut that by, I'm not saying that, I'm not discounting your personal experiences, because I cannot. However, what I know is that this country has had some strong female leaders, your mother included.
Thank you.
And two of which became premiers of this country. Dame Jennifer Smith and Premier Paula Cox. Now, I don't really know what goes on that side of the aisle, but on my side of the aisle, called the PLP, you don't get to be the leader of the PLP by just, I don't know, I want to be the leader. You had to and even before those two became premier, we had my aunt, Dame Liz Brown Evans. So the point I'm driving at is that, yes, politics was a male-created creature, like many other things. Shouldn't say all other things. And as you said, some women get involved and realize, for whatever reasons, this ain't for me, and cut a trail. However, what my challenge is that in any arena in which one wants to be not necessarily the leader, but a leader of people, you have to know that this is the territory in which you're going into, but learn how to, for lack of a better term, create your own catwalk. And what I found with yourself and many others on your side of the aisle is that my best times in Parliament was actually debating the women in the OBA, because they're the ones who did the research. They were the ones who articulated well without personal attacks. Well, maybe somewhere in there. But I used to come Parliament okay, how am I going to get around Honorable Pat Pamplin? Because I know she's coming with a long list of facts. And so I say all that to you to say that although it may come across that some aren't listening, or some males are trying to be chauvinistic, even if they don't realize they're being chauvinistic, that there's many of us out here who may not necessarily vote OBA, but respect the work that the women, especially in the last sitting of the OBA, have done and continue to do behind the scenes. So I just wanted to put that in your ear so you didn't feel like no one was listening, or people haven't realized the work that you all did.
Yes, and naming the women that you have listed, absolutely. These are individuals who have a very clear message. Their passion was well established. They did their homework. They were articulate. There was a level of self-confidence and self-belief and dedication to their cause. And those things have to evolve and grow. It's to me, it has been a journey to get to that point within the parliamentary process. And you're putting all of the role models up on the shelf for women like myself to move toward, to use as my examples of what needs to be done. And, I just a little aside, I chased Dame Jennifer around Bermuda for months because I was so interested in reading her works, because she has a couple of books that are out, but one book in particular of her speeches. And, to me, that is very, very important reading. Not only does she speak to some very interesting topics, especially I enjoy her speeches in education or on education, but we have to lead by example. And these women have certainly set amazing examples for any women that are aspiring to the parliamentary system.
Yes, thank you for that. And just continuing on the trend, what things do you think Bermuda can do to not only just, mentor, because I do think that, obviously both parties take it upon, ourselves to mentor any up and coming women who wish to enter the political arena. But what do you think maybe collaboratively or, island-wise we can do to kind of encourage women to step up into leadership positions within the political arena? And, what might have made it easier for you when you joined that maybe we could try to implement to make it easier for the next generation?
So I was unfortunately aged out by the time I got back to Bermuda to get involved in politics, but the youth parliament is a phenomenal place to start. I have witnessed some amazing debaters, including in particular women, that have just excelled in that space. So that's a major part of high school programs now. And so getting involved in youth parliament, I think, is a phenomenal way to get a real taste for what parliament is like. And although this is not something that I would advocate for in Bermuda necessarily without a great deal more thought, but worldwide, many governments are looking at quotas. And so the sort of global quota right now is for women to represent 30% of a country's parliament. And so, that would help an awful lot as well, because there are women who are interested in being involved in parliament, but for whatever reasons, and I'm sure it would be defended tooth and nail if anyone were to point fingers or make accusations, but women often come in on the back foot. Either women are offered seats that are marginal, and so there's a real fight to win it, coming in with very little support and understanding what is involved. Because I had a whole spiel that I spoke about around Parliament, but there's a whole nother conversation to have around service to your constituents. And in Bermuda, there's an expectation that there should be a known and familiar one-on-one relationship with each one of your constituents. And so that in and of itself is a whole other learning. So for women getting involved, youth parliament if you're young, there's the idea that there could be quotas out there in the world, and volunteering. And even if it's just one little aspect, because it will at least open the door to find out more.
So let me ask this: apart from what organizations, if any, I don't know, 'cause I'm not a woman, are there for women in Parliament? Rather, no matter which side you're on, or what organizations are there locally or internationally?
Yeah, so for me, I actually was very interested in the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, also known as the CPA. And that is a global, that's all the Commonwealth countries have come together in this association. And there is a wealth of information, support, committees, all training, you name it, conferences where a woman can tap into. And as a Bermudian, I believe that anybody can, or, from any Commonwealth country can just Google Commonwealth Parliamentary Association and begin the journey. That would probably be the broadest place to start. From a political perspective, the other, to be honest with you, I would say the caucuses. I would venture to say that both caucuses, I certainly know the OBA has a strong women of the OBA caucus, and getting in just as a committee member just to listen and learn more and participate from there.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask this question, and you can feel free to not answer it. All of this background training and so on, and when you finally decide to run for Parliament, was which year?
2012.
So what was it like actually knocking on doors, or you knew that from birth?
I knew that from birth.
Okay. And what sort of reception did you get on those doors?
Well, at this point, in 2012, it was almost a member of the family. I don't hide the fact that my mother held the seat that I'm in now for Pembroke Southwest. She held the seat before me. I canvassed with her from a young child coming home from school on summer holidays constantly. And so when I started canvassing, these were all people that already were familiar with me or knew me for many years and had literally watched me grow up. So that's a little skewed. And I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I didn't actually get to the question yet. The question that everybody, wants to know, why the OBA?
Probably because I followed in the footsteps of my mother. My father was very much an independent, and I have had family members, like as in first cousins, the former Premier Alex Scott on the other side. And be famous, I'm going to be honest with you. For me, I'm here for public service. I'm here to serve my country and to serve the people who live in my country. And so for me, I'm not as interested in the political bantering and the political side of things. I just am trying to find a clear path for me to provide the best service and the best support for any constituent on this island who needs my help. And that's it.
Okay. All right. I wanted to ask because, clearly your family is, on both sides of the aisle. So you could have easily said, hey, cousin Alex, listen, I think I want to, do the right thing.
Fam is always trying to put a green shirt on somebody. Gee.
Any other questions?
Just something a bit more internationally, right? So in more large parliamentary or government situations, right? Like America, Britain, a lot of times, women tend to come under fire for, if you're too vocal, if you're too strong, they try to kind of put some masculine traits on you. And if you're too meek, then, they say you're too soft. And you find that the media internationally, when covering male politicians, is a stark difference from covering a female politician. If you can even look at situations like Hillary Clinton running against he who should not be named, and you have Kamala Harris or Michelle Obama and all of these other folks in that arena, who it kind of shows you a kind of juxtaposition between a male who may sit in, let's say, in the Bermuda Parliament and say nothing, and a female who may sit in the Bermuda Parliament and not say much, but they may be held at a different standard. So just kind of from a global point of view back to a local point of view, do you feel like any of that from the larger jurisdictions translates here to women who step in the arena?
Yes, I would say that there's a real challenge there, and there is a population and a thought that, yes, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to make sure my voice is loud and heard, and I'm going to get in there and I'm going to, fight on equal ground, kind of reference. My take on that, Mr. Robinson, is that women and people in general, males, females, have their own personal characteristics. I tend to be a little more thoughtful. I don't really speak until I'm ready to share what I believe in, and it is very different from maybe someone else's characteristics that are a bit more extrovert or very sort of social and talkative. And I believe that it's very important as parliaments evolve that we do take note of people's different personalities and character traits as far as their delivery, and give them the respect, give them the option to be able to express themselves the way that they like without having to stand on top of a soapbox and yell at the top of their voice. And I'm just using that as a very raw example. But I'm a doer. I will accomplish head over heels, accomplish tasks and duties to support constituents. But it's not going to make the news. It's not going to make the headlines. It's not going to, put me up on some pedestal somewhere. And I'm just doing my duty. I'm just providing a service. And that oftentimes is not recognized because the traditional parliamentary structure is that it's, who can bark the loudest and make the most noise and therefore is heard and therefore, gets to take the lead. And I'm not sure that in the future as we evolve and more diverse people represent in houses of parliament, that's always going to be the case, that we may find that there are other ways to be just as effective and validate those other ways as being effective, and not to just put them aside and disregard them because it's not loud and it's not ferocious and it's not passionate and emotional and very sort of extrovert. So we need to recognize the different personalities, the different characteristics, and the different ways that people get things done, because that's what creates a variety to be productive and to have a team that's really going to get results.
Well, thank you. Anything from you, MP?
I'm an extrovert.
Yeah, well, yeah, we know that.
No, I want to thank you for that, because a lot of times people, especially people involved in leadership, they forget that they're there to serve, right? And a lot of your most effective work is what the people don't see. Because if you're doing something simply to, let me get up in the news, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you become this media person, right? And you're saying when you actually look at what they're actually doing, is like they aren't doing much. So you as MP Jackson said, you recognize you can tell the character traits. You sit in a room. We haven't sat in the same parliament in the room for over a year because of COVID. But when when I first got elected, I was in what was called the kiddie corner, the freshman corner. And so I'm sitting there, and literally, majority of people sitting on the side that I was sitting on were all, what was left of the OBA, right?
I think we sat next to each other, or pretty close to each other for a bit.
Yeah, well, Mr. Dunkley got in the way, and then there was Jeff Barron for a minute. But the point I'm driving at is you get to see people's body language, right? So I'm here sitting down as a new PLP MP. I'm got literally on my right hand side. I'm got Jeff Barron. I got Travel Monis, MP Travel Monis, MP Jeff Barron. I got MP Dunkley. People like I'm literally fought against all my life, right? And you're expecting like there to be some real like animosity, and then it wasn't that bad. But then, there were persons such as MP Atherton, MP Pat Pamplin, MP Leah Scott, who, in my opinion, were the brain trust of the OBA from 2017 until 2020, right? And you knew, like, you're going to have some of these persons come up with all this bluster, blah, blah, blah. And then you had the women who sat down, probably on a Tuesday in a caucus or WhatsApp chats or whatever, and they had a plan. But more importantly, right, back to the point, they were doers. They are doers. None of them passed. They are doers, right? They may not get up and, self-pontificate like other people, but they were doers. So I knew when they were getting to their feet, I knew like, okay, I'm going to study exactly what they're saying because they're 99.9% accurate, right? And so I say this to you again, MP Jackson, that although Parliament does not allow for us to give compliments to the other side, let me give you some compliments today. Because you are very well respected. I remember you and I got into one little tussle, I think it was about gumbays or something. Right? And I was like, oh, she don't like me now. And, and then we was at this function, and she came up and hugged me, and she was like, I was like, we just went after each other the day before. He was like, oh, don't worry about that. That's just politics. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know if you remember, but I won't get into that. But
I learned a lot from that debate.
Right. So I say that to say that with you now being the SOLE, SOLE, and SOUL, woman in the opposition presently.
As a parliamentarian.
Yeah, you got in the House of Parliament.
Yes.
You have to actually harness that brain trust from those other ladies who mentored you, schooled you, and bring that to the fore, because honestly, it's like when we debate now, it's like, okay, there's MP Richardson who's gonna just be technical, Then there's MP Scott Pyramid who's gonna be technical, and then there might be some bluster from two other persons now and then, but the woman side of thing has to be brought to the fore. And this is where I say, as the SOL woman, you have to bring that SOUL, that compassion for others. I'm not saying you don't do it, but continue to do that even more so, because people need to feel that from the opposition, that there's this soul for others, there's this empathy, there's this, we're in touch with Bermudians, So that's the only thing I would say, that bring that passion and that knowledge that was there from 2017 to 2020. Bring that to the fore now, because it's missing. I miss it. Like I honestly miss it. Like.
Yes. We've had a very difficult year with COVID and being in a virtual room because it does not allow for really effective communication and interpersonal communication amongst colleagues. And that's really been to our detriment when it comes to debate and just engaging in the parliamentary process from that perspective. And that's my personal opinion there. And so I do look forward to us reconvening in person in a House of Assembly, and getting back to that. And certainly, I've gotten to the point where I have more capacity for public service and more capacity for Parliament. Again, the work-life balance, the financial reasons for me having to have a full-time job and dedicate a lot of my time to that are now waning and coming to an end. And so that gives me more capacity to become more involved in Parliament and to really fulfill my commitment to its fullest. It's been a real challenge.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, we must thank you for giving up 1 hour. We had said it might have been shorter, but you've actually inspired us up in there. Dwayne is very much enthralled. Let me use that word.
I'm right on the top of the table.
And is looking forward to when he gets up in Parliament.
Hey, we can do.
Yes.
And he can be a doer, and they're not just a boisterous voice in the wilderness.
I do.
He does.
Okay, all right.
You don't have to be a parliamentarian to do good service.
That's
so
right.
Tell us just quickly, you have 2 children, you said?
I do.
Any grands?
Not yet.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for bringing your perspective of women in Parliament and, all the things that go into being an effective voice in Parliament for the people.
Well, thank you, MP Famous. Thank you, Mr. Robinson, for inviting me to your show today. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Have a good one. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Close it out.
Famous taking pot shots because his team lost cup match.
Oh,
and now I say I ain't gonna do it because my
cup
team
match
won
is
cup
over,
match.
bro. On that note, I got a WhatsApp from somebody says, "Oh, I haven't congratulated them yet, but they're listening to the show." The person's name is Taliba Branch, also known as Roberta Branch. So you got your congratulations now. Anyway, on that note, that's it.
Done.
Hit the gavel.
Hey.
All right, you have been listening to Motion to Adjourn with MP Chris Famous and Dwayne Robinson.